Good morning. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Bex, good evening. How are you today?
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us live. It's great to have you. Guys, we're going to be having a very interesting conversation today. We're talking about welfare, social license, and dissection findings. So pretty broad topics, all three of them, but we're going to try and find some threads that run through those three things according to Bex's experience and what she's been sharing on social media and through her Patreon page. There's some really interesting stuff there. So if you guys have any questions or you want to join the conversation, please do. We're here to have that discussion with you. Let's ask our questions. Let's join the discussion, comment, share. Let's hear what you guys have to say. There is so much to discuss in terms of welfare and social license, and this is definitely something that people are talking more and more about, and that we're seeing changes in the equestrian industry, which are good and maybe not good. So let's have the conversations and let's see where this goes. So Bex, will you please introduce yourself? Let us know about you, who you are, and your journey to where you are today.
Cool, thanks. It's Annie.
Annie.
Annie, right, okay, excellent. Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Nairn. My name on socials is Bex Nairn. That just seemed the casual way to sort of broadcast myself. And I have been dissecting horses for 4 years now, but what led me into doing that was that I have been a professional taxidermist since I was 16. So I'm 38 now. I've always done that on and off over my adult years in between working with horses full time. So I did a lot of starting for other people, a lot of schooling for other people. And then as a sideline to that, I was taking on a lot of race horses and rehoming them. So that's sort of always been my sort of equestrian background. And then, taxidermy, it's a bit out of the box. I'm one of only a handful of women who really want to do that kind of work, but it's very interesting, and I get to see a lot of animals that I wouldn't normally have time to see, particularly up close. So that's been a very interesting career choice, and it's one that I've really appreciated the skills that I've gained in order to be able to jump into what I'm doing now, which is full-time dissection work. I'm really working 7 days a week at the moment, and my mainstay of income would be from the Patreon, but I do public dissections as well. I've got one booked in for next February or this February coming up in the North Island. And I also have a large collection of bones now that I take around to pony clubs, and I run these clinics so that people can get a look in the inside of the horse. And I have a lot of bones displaying certain pathologies, which people find very interesting. Just to clarify, because I think a lot of people get confused, I'm not a vet. I have no therapy background. I'm not a body worker. My interest coming into this really just kind of happened organically. And I was saying to you before that how I started doing this was in 2020, my foal's mother died, and we got a vet out to do an autopsy. We suspected colic, and she opened up the stomach, the cecum popped out. I was just like, wow, I'd never seen anything like that before. And we pulled out the intestines, and we found the twist in the bowel and the blackened off bowel, and it was just absolutely amazing. For the vet, she was all just very textbook standard, well, this is this and this is this, and I was just absolutely blown away. And then we dug the hole and we buried the horse. And then it was about 4 months later, one of my clients' horses had an intermittent lameness where on a cold morning, the horse would spend a lot of time lying down and was notably lame when it was cold. And then when it would warm up, the horse was somewhat better, only lame on a tight, small circle. And they exhausted all the insurance money to see what was wrong with the horse. And eventually the vets sort of really didn't have an answer, but they knew that it was below the fetlock, the nerve blocks that were performed. So I sort of casually said to my client one day, where they were at the point where they were going to put the horse down, I said, would you mind if I took the 2 front legs off at the knees and just had a look for interest sakes to see what we could find? And I did note that the farrier who was working on the horse at the time had brought up that the horse had a damaged looking part on the bar of the sole of the hoof. But the vets had sort of dismissed it and said, oh yeah, that's, that'll be nothing. When we dissected the hoof capsule and we pulled out the coffin bone, this awful looking white infected fluid came out with the coffin bone. And I didn't really notice until we actually dissected both hooves, but the hoof that had the bar problem at the bottom actually had a puncture wound that had never healed, and that puncture wound still went through to the hoof capsule. And the whole coffin bone had turned black and necrotic, and I'd never seen anything like it, and when you put these two coffin bones beside one another, one was all darkened off and like a very, you say blackened, but it's like a dark grey, looked really unhealthy. Itself had started to demineralize. And then the other coffin bone beside it was the healthy, sort of nice yellow looking bone that you would expect to see in a hoof capsule. So straight off the bat, I was just absolutely amazed because, this horse had had a lot of tests done on it, x-rays, vets, they've spent a lot of money, and it was just a hole through the bar of the hoof and a hoof capsule infection. Now, while it wouldn't have made a difference to the horse's outcome because it was too advanced, it sort of raised those questions of me about like, what don't we know, and I ran that past a few of my vet friends, and they were sort of like, oh wow, look at that, never heard of that. And I was like, oh, okay. And that was my sort of first thought of like, well, what else don't we know, and so over the last 4 years, while I've been getting more and more into this, I do this full time for a job now. I only started doing it full time for a job about a year ago. Before that, it was all just sort of a hobby on the side. And I was just dissecting horses as they came along through the charity that I was operating that was rehoming standardbreds. We were doing 100 standardbreds a year. And 30 to 40% of our horses were failing the program. So that was, for me, I couldn't understand why these young horses, 4, 5, 6-year-old horses, were failing the program on what seemed like physical issues, but manifested in sort of quite a few mental ways as well. And so I went to the board of trustees, which I was on at the time, and said, look, do you mind if I take these horses home and have a look over their bodies after they've been put down? And I, at the time, sort of, found some interesting things, but I didn't really understand the scope of it at that stage because I was very new to what I was doing. It wasn't until about a year and a half ago when I started looking at sport horses and older horses that I had a comparison. And I also have got 4 horses in my collection who are unridden. So I'm up to, I've just done just done 2 horses today. I'm up to 44 now. So, and this year it's really ramped up. I'm doing 2 dissections a week and traveling a lot with the dissections as well. I'm back in Ireland in March. April. We've changed it to April. Back in Ireland in April. So it's really taken off. It's great that people are very interested in the work, but it's also really important. I think it would be easy to look at my page and think like, we're breaking horses left, right, and centre. It's just that I don't get given a lot of great specimens to look at. I've really valued the horses that I've looked at that have been unridden, and one of the horses in my collection is actually a 28-year-old broodmare who was never started. And I mean, I see worse bodies on race horses. It was really interesting to have a look at that.
Wow.
So
wow.
That's my history in a nutshell. I hope I didn't talk too fast, so I can be a bit of a motor mouth.
I love that. I actually have a client at the moment with 2. She has lots of horses, but the 2 that I'm seeing, a 28-year-old Boerbart mare who's been in work and ridden her whole life. She looks like a 5-year-old, if I'm honest. Yep. I put her through a short rehab program and was like, there's nothing I can do more. She's perfect, literally perfect. And an 18-year-old thoroughbred who's never going to graduate from rehab because he's so broken, right? It's very interesting to see the differences. So one thing I'd love to highlight actually from having this conversation with you is that one of the things that we really believe in at Online Pet Health is that we can learn from everyone. So while we're rehab professionals and we're working, we're working with body workers and physios and vets, etc., that are focusing on rehab, we really believe there's something to learn from everyone. And the things that you're gaining, the knowledge and understanding that you're gaining from doing these dissections is something that we can't do ourselves because we're working on the bodies. And I love to say to my clients, I do not have x-ray vision, but even if I did have x-ray vision, I would still be missing so many things because it isn't just about the bones, it's about the soft tissue structures. Maybe I should change that to I don't have MRI vision. I can't tell you what's happening underneath the skin if I can't see it. So what are some of the, really interesting or significant welfare concerns that are coming through for you by doing these dissections?
I think what really stands out to me is just like, particularly with the racehorses. Well, I'm going to speak on racehorses because I've got no doubt, and people bring this up all the time on my Facebook page, is like, it's not just racehorses, it's the 5-year-old jumping series. We've got the jumping series class, age classes start at 4 here. So, it's not just racehorses, but I'd like to stay speaking on the things that I have experience with. So that's mainly racehorses for me. And I am yet to open up a racehorse's joints and not see synovitis in lower leg joints. And synovitis is an inflammatory issue with the joints. And I'll either see current red, very vascular looking synovitis, or I'll see old, and it sort of turns like a scar tissuey sort of color with a bit of slight yellow tinge to it. So there's either old or new, inflamed looking. And I regularly see a breakdown of joints, like cartilage in the joints. I looked at a 5-year-old standardbred today who had significant breakdown of the cartilage in the shoulder, the point of the shoulder. And I think it comes back to, like, what is an acceptable level of wear and tear on a horse's body? And that's, for me, where the welfare aspect comes in. And I know from having worked, when I started the charity Stable to Stirrup, I fully believed that I would be able to have some kind of input on welfare within the racing industry. We managed to gain a decent amount of funding from within the industry. Just last year, my team won an award for outstanding contribution to racing. So I'm not commenting on these things because I just stood on the sidelines as like, abuse, that's awful. It's not like that. I believe that these industries just need to reform, and the problem I found within the industry itself in trying to help, and I was involved in 2 massive rescue operations of standardbreds here. The first one, 21 standardbreds who were in a dire way in a paddock here in Canterbury, and then 44 standardbreds, which you can find online if you Google Donegal House. And that was a rescue operation that actually the industry funded, and so we worked in with the industry. And that was really the nail in the coffin for me because of the way that matter was handled, and also the punishment that was dished out to that man. And the fact that he still has horses racing in the industry that are owned by people who are major players in the governing body. I can't say too much. I'm trying to keep that as vanilla as possible, but it was enough for me to go, you know what? These people operate in this little echo chamber of sort of the race community, and they all have one another's backs, and they all sweep things under the rug. And, it doesn't take that much to actually go and uncover some really heinous things that are happening in the background. If you go and look on the Racing Integrity website, you'll find people who have been reprimanded for wrapping barbed wire around boring poles on their racehorses. And the RIU are trying to clean things up, but it's a huge problem. And when we came to the end of that rescue operation, we ended up having to shoot the last 15 horses. And I found it really difficult because my recommendations for how the rescue operation should run and what horses we took off first I suggested we take the yearlings off first because they were the least damaged, both mentally and physically. And those horses got left till last. And we rushed up there with a float on the last day to rescue one yearling filly. And I found it really, really hard because you're looking at, 9 young horses who all could have had a future. And I had to stand there and pick out the one that was the best looking, that had the best conformation, to make it through. And so that was really the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And the thing is that the industry doesn't even really realize what welfare issues are in regards to the way the rest of the equestrian industry regards welfare. And so there's this huge disconnect of what is actually acceptable within the racing industry and then what is acceptable within equestrianism. I've shared a few times on my page about yearlings being broken into cart. And that's not only happening to standardbreds, that's happening to a lot of thoroughbreds as well. And although people don't want to talk about it because of the echo chamber that I was talking about, it happens. And I get a lot of private messages from people who are still working in the industry who are saying, yep, Bex, that does happen. Even though people on social media are going, oh, that's ridiculous, that doesn't happen. Just last week, I was sent a video of a yearling standardbred, 12 months old, being ridden by a fully grown man.
Yeah. There is this huge discrepancy between what we say and what we do in the equine industry. People can be spouting all the right words and saying all the right things, and their message is perfect, and then when you look at their horses and how they're working and how they're riding, it doesn't match what they're saying at all. And I mean, what you're describing is the extreme of that. Right. And many industries have that. The racing industry, for sure, we know that it happens, but it's not restricted to there. I think it's more common where there are financial, the bigger the financial reward or gain, the more often it happens. And it's rough, it's hectic. And I think that brings up such a question for us in what is our role? How do we help? Can we even make a difference? Because as you've just described, you try and work with them, you go in there, and all it does at the end of the day is it crushes you because you're not they don't change. They continue to do the same thing, knowing better, right?
Yeah.
So is it you can easily say, oh, you're saying these things and then you're doing these things. Do you not know? Do you not see? Is there an ignorance happening here? Or
and that's the big problem at the moment. Yeah, look, there's a lot of virtue signaling going on at the moment from a lot of the industries where they want to be seen to be doing something, but they're still not protecting the horses in the way that the horses need protecting. I mean, if there's not a law against breaking in a horse and riding it as a yearling based on what we know a horse's skeleton looks like as a yearling, I just think there's a real serious problem, and that really makes me sad because it's not. This is why I stopped rehoming, because I no longer believed in the product that we were rehoming to people and making it somebody else's problem. And that's something that we've seen now, moving forward away from doing the rehoming work, is that we get the emails from people who personally contact us because they know that I was involved in the charity, myself and both Kerry, get messages, at least monthly, of horses that we have rehomed, and they're like, oh, the horse is really unhappy now, it's got arthritis, or it's bucking me off, it seems really grumpy. They're unhappy animals, and I don't know what the answer is, and I hate to talk about these things without having answers, but you've got to be really careful too, because you can't just start making broad, regulations to suit everybody. Do you know what I mean? Because it just won't work.
Yeah.
So I don't, that's why I give away a lot of information on my Facebook page, because there's so much information and stuff that I'm seeing that I just think, oh my God, people need to know this, And even, with the video I put out the other day about the 4-year-old spine, or like tonight, one of the pelvises of the 5-year-old standardbred, I was measuring how much the pelvis can expand and contract. And then, my partner often helps me do a lot of videoing. And, I literally just popped a pelvis apart. 5-year-old pelvis, just pop, because the pubis symphysis still isn't fused. You can just break it apart.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's sure. Elsa, it's great to have you live with us. Thank you for joining us. She says that it occurs in trotter racing in Sweden too, that some are started before they are mature. Absolutely. I think this is the way it's done in the racing industry, regardless of where we are in the world. And she says that the more that folk know, change comes slowly. Look at overbending in the dressage world.
Yeah.
Change comes so slowly.
It really does. But that was something that I realized relatively soon once I started sharing things on Facebook, that, myself, I'm a trainer myself, and I taught for a long time, and you could tell clients until you're blue in the face. And I know all you body workers will have the same experience, because they want you guys to turn up and be the magic bullet. But the horse is bolted. And that's what I say to people with buying, the X-race horses. Like, you're the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. The horse has already jumped. There are some things that are irreversible. And, when I first started dissecting all the standardbreds and the thoroughbreds, all their lumbars would be bunched up. So the transverse processes that, come off the vertebral body, they would all be bunched up like this. So instead of, being in a nice straight line, the top and the bottom were sort of pulled together and sandwiched together, which I believe has got a lot to do with the psoas minor and the psoas major. I see a lot of overdeveloped psoas minor and majors in that area. And I thought that was normal until I started dissecting sport horses, and I was like, oh, look at that. The way that they look as yearlings, they still look like that at 24, And so that was sort of an aha moment. And then when I first started doing it, I thought that tubosacrals must need to touch. And I thought, well, that's not how it looks in anatomy books, but, sometimes there's some discrepancies. So it wasn't until I started talking to other dissectionists who did sport horses that I realized that actually those tubosacrals, they start out, about 3 centimeters apart. And oftentimes when I see the race horses, those tubosacrals are touching. The lumbar's been pushed into where S1 should be, and S1 has been pushed out behind the pelvis, and the whole lot has subluxated, and the sacroiliac joints no longer make a nice union like this. I was seeing sacroiliac joints that were like this, and I'd open up the sacroiliac joints, and I would, 9 times out of 10, there'd be a bleed into the sacroiliac joint, or you could see a clear subluxation, and that stuff didn't hit home to me until I started looking at the sport horse breeds. And I've dissected a couple of foals now, and S1 sits in between the tubosacrals and the pelvis. That's where it's meant to be. So
sure, it raises so many questions, and like you said, how do we have these conversations without having the answers? Elsa, let's do this one. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Let's see if it'll come up. Yeah. I began to get on my horse at 5, but got so much flack from local horse folk because I was wasting her. This horse took me to the Arctic after a massive traffic accident, and the vet was amazed she got better so quickly and was able to do the work. I keep trying to tell people the body that is properly mature and trained can cope with much. So interesting with sport horse differences. I'm beginning to think I was imagining the number of Papa's problems I'm seeing, but maybe not. What is Papa's problems?
I think Papa's maybe the horse.
Maybe it's Papa's problem.
Papa's horse.
Is Papa's a horse? Is that a breed?
No, I think Papa's might be the name. Papa's?
Soas. It is Soas. Soas problems.
Was she trying to say Soas? Yeah.
Soas problems. Yeah.
It could have been. Yeah, and look, that's a really valid comment, and I hear similar stories all the time. And look, when I decided that I wanted to do things differently, and I realized that people are just willfully ignorant, you really just have to start doing things by yourself, away from people who have those opinions, because I totally agree. Once you've seen the inside of a horse, and look, I'm no saint. 5 years ago, before I started doing this, I would have said it was perfectly fine to hop on a 2.5, 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And once you start looking inside of the horse and you see those growth plates and you see how much extra movement a spine has, when those growth plates are open, it changes you. And that is the power of the dissection work. And that's what I realized really early on, is that I could make the connection, between showing what happens when the horse is broken at the second, and where that nuchal ligament actually flips to and what happens. Those are powerful images to be able to show people. There's a lot of power in doing the dissection work, and I see people have the most amazing epiphanies on my dissections. One lady, when we, pulled the skin back and you could see all the facial nerves and how superficial they are and how they just sit underneath of the skin. Yeah. And she was like, so how would a grackle affect that? And I was like, well, you'd be rubbing exactly on those nerves. And she's like, oh my God, people have told me to not ride in a grackle, but I never really understood why, And so without me having to say, have you considered that maybe strapping your horse's mouth shut and riding with a harsh bit, that there might be another way? You don't have to take that moral high ground anymore. You just let people see the information, see the horse's body, how interconnected it is. You can flex the head and the hind leg moves, on a dead animal.
Yeah.
So these kind of moments for people they're really powerful, and that's why I try and share as much as I can on my social media, because so many people have said, you know what, I don't think I could ever do a dissection, but after watching your content and the bones, it's so fascinating that I think I could now. And I say to people, I call it horrinating, because it's half horrifying and it's half fascinating. Where it's like going past a car crash. You shouldn't look, but you can't not look at what's in front of you. And so often that fascination will take over, and people are normally fine. I haven't had any fainters or any vomiters on my dissections, because it's so interesting.
It is interesting, and when you're taking that kind of learning perspective and you're there to learn, it does change how you're looking at the body. It does change that kind of emotional component, which definitely can be tricky. I've done one equine dissection. I definitely want to do more this year, because like you say, there is actually how better for us to understand what's going on, and the one horse that I did, every single joint, she had like OCD lesions in every single joint in her legs, shoulders, elbows, compasses, fetlocks, hocks, stifles, every single joint. And it was just like, how
it's amazing. And I've come across the same thing. And then the other thing is, it's not just the dissection work, it's processing the bones afterwards. So I would say that I find 80% of what I'm going to find in dissection, and then I'll find a further 20% when the bones are clean. I did a horse recently who had lots and lots of problems, but once the bones were cleaned, we actually found out that in the third tarsal bone in the hock, he'd had a fracture clean through it. Yeah, and it had healed somewhat, but the fracture line was still clearly there, right through the middle of the tarsal. And this horse, Annie, had a bone chip in the hock as well, but this horse wasn't lame, like he wasn't hopping lame, but he was a miserable, unhappy horse. And so, that's the other thing too, is that I'm regularly finding things that would just make a horse chronically unhappy, not like clinically lame. So I really think these days, it's really helped me to view horses in that much more empathetic way of, like, if they are protesting to something, it's normally really genuine communication from the horse, because they're so stoic. And if it gets to the point where the horse is, bucking, rearing, napping, biting, all of those really loud, responses, in my opinion, it's probably too late. I think if you're not paying attention to the subtle signs of discomfort and soreness, and you let it go on too long, the body is amazing at compensating. And I see evidence of that all the time through the body.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a big thing for me, is this behavioral connection to pain, because people don't get it. They're not getting it, right? A lot of people are starting to listen, but you're getting that discrepancy between, I'm saying the right things and still, I'm riding my horse my reins are really tight. They're wearing a flash noseband. I'm getting the head tilt and the twisting. And, we go into this movement and my horse does this little twist and stiffens the shoulder. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? Are you listening?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Does she need to start bucking when we start doing canter transitions? No, she doesn't. She told you at a walk that this was uncomfortable. So do you have to go there? No. So
and that's a really hard part about doing all of this. And I mean, it felt like for a long time that I was banging my head against a brick wall. And I used to have like 2 mental breakdowns every year doing the rehoming work, because you just see horses that are just really unhappy. And I just thought, like, why am I doing this? There's a period of time when you do it and you're just doing it for a job, and you just sort of compartmentalize what you're doing almost, and you make excuses for what you're doing. And, like, the horses would come off the racetrack, and they'd be so inverted, and I had 3 months to like train a horse to rehome it. So, I would put like a not a draw rein, but like a harborage rein, just from the bit to the girth, just to get the horse to go like, oh, I can relax and take a new posture. Now, would I do that with my personal horses? Shit, no. And you shouldn't have to use gadgets and stuff like that. But I had 3 months to take a horse that looks like a giraffe and get it somewhat relaxed. And so I was taking all these shortcuts that, like, in my heart, I was like, this is shit, and I don't want to be doing this. But it's the lesser evil to try and rehome these horses, because the homes that you're selling them to, they're often amateur riders, and they're not even capable of producing a horse slowly and methodically and doing the groundwork and the in-hand work before they even get to the ridden stage. Most of them want to hop on and they want to go straight out the next week for a trek, or they want to take it to a competition and jump it, and you're trying to turn a bodybuilder into a ballerina. Like, both of those are physically amazing, but you couldn't take a bodybuilder and turn it into a ballerina, or a ballerina into a bodybuilder, in 3 months. It would be really challenging. So I just completely fell out of love with that idea. Plus, it really played on my mind with the social conscience type stuff. I felt like I was giving the industry something to feel good about that they didn't deserve. And I get a lot of hate for it. But at the end of the day, we all have to live in our own authentic selves. And that's how I felt. And maybe I won't feel like that in 10 years. I don't know. But I also don't think that racing should be shut down. I think that the industry needs to reform itself. And I live in hope, but I don't personally think it's going to happen. In New Zealand, they've just put the stakes up for 2-year-olds. So it's actually the most lucrative sector to be racing in. And it's really challenging. Like, I talk to the trainers, and even the trainers will say to me, like, oh, this horse might go good for a year, but it'll be broken by the time it's 3.5. But the owners are pushing, they want the stakes from the 2-year-old racing. So I don't have any answers for the future, but I'm worried for horse sports generally. I honestly am. I'm worried for horse sports because, I was saying to you before that in America, when the slaughterhouses closed down because they, felt that the slaughterhouses were so inhumane and that they were, unregulated and not operating very well. And now those horses at auction houses get shipped off to Mexico and Canada in worse conditions, crammed into awful crates and containers, and they have to suffer for an extra, 12-hour, whatever it is, journey to get to Mexico to be killed in unregulated slaughterhouses anyway. They could have reformed the legislation and made sure that slaughterhouses were up to standard, and that those horses' final moments, or days or whatever it is, weren't suffering. It's, yeah.
Yes, I think there is. I think we have to be really realistic when we think about stuff like that, right?
Yes.
The ideal is that, we don't have to euthanize these horses. Cool. What about the thousands and thousands of horses that don't have homes, do not have food, do not have water, do not have, adequate living conditions? There is no one to take care of them. There is no financial backing. Super. What happens to them now because they're kept alive? So
exactly.
Wrong or right, it isn't really a wrong or right thing. It is about what is, you said, what is the least evil, right? That we can do. What is the
100%.
The least evil? And I don't know, can we live with that? Can we live with this least evil, right?
That's where social license.
Yeah.
That's where social license comes in.
Yeah. A very big part of the problem is that there are too many. So we're continuing to breed where where their lives cannot be sustained. We're bringing more and more dogs and horses into this world where we cannot support them for their lifetime because their value is only 2, 3, 4 years maximum. And then what? Then what happens to them? There is no good path from there onwards, right? And that's a big thing. So what happens if you spoke earlier about, I'm going to use the word because it's, the greenies, okay? And my husband used to work with elephants within the tourism industry. And I know how they worked with the elephants. I know how they trained them because I was there. I was behind the scenes, okay? Yeah. Was everything 100% always perfect? No. But oh my gosh, you're dealing with a massive African elephant who could kill you. I'm sorry. So the biggest tool that they had was like a little hook stick. Okay, that was what they had in their hands ever. That was the maximum thing. It's not even a sharp hook in an elephant's skin. And he would come home and he would say, oh, they've had complaints from, they primarily used clicker training and positive reinforcement to train the elephants. Let me just put that down. But when they needed to go to the other side, that is the only tool that they had, right? So now he would come home and he would complain about these greenies who are like, you should never ride an elephant, and you guys are, you're using inhumane training methods, not actually being aware of the training methods that they're using at all. And I would go, really? You're riding them with a little stick to guide them? We are riding horses with bits and springs and saddles and reins and gadgets and pulleys and, all these things, and that's okay. You're literally getting on an elephant in the middle of the bushveld with a tiny little stick that you poke it behind the ear to say, turn left or turn right. And that is socially unacceptable. But we can get on horses and force them into postures, positions, paces, spaces, sports, competitions, environments that they would never, it bogs my mind. So my point is, you take someone, a greenie, with an idealistic view of what something should look like, and they come in with a very limited amount of information, a very limited viewpoint. This is the ideal situation. And they have the loudest voices, right? Yeah. They come onto social media, they create uproar, whatever they do, I don't know. And then you end up with changes to the legislation, which says, I'm going to continue with the elephants. You are not allowed to ride these elephants. No one's ever allowed to ride them, right? But now you have a whole nother problem. The problem is these elephants are sustained and fed by the money they bring in from tourism. Yes. Now, if you take away that source of income, what happens to the elephants? Now, you can't pay 15 handlers to be present with the herd for the entirety of the 24-hour cycle, because that's what it takes to take care of elephants and keep them safe in smaller spaces, right, where they don't have hundreds and thousands of hectares to move. And we don't have hundreds of thousands of hectares for them to move. So their ultimate ending is they are put down. That's it. Yeah. So you've taken animals that are actually happy with the job that they're doing and are flourishing in the space, and the end is that they have to be put down because there is nothing else. They can't go anywhere else. They can't be put into the wild. There isn't space.
And that's a huge problem. And people forget that the greenies who, there's a real undercurrent of people who think that we shouldn't ride horses, full stop. Yeah. Okay. Now, when you get those people who are less educated in equestrianism generally, and they come out with these large, broad blanket statements, of, you know, putting bits in horses' mouths is evil, and, you know, riding this way is evil, and whatever it is they've got going on. People forget that equestrianism is like this small wee, you know, it's like we've got an echo chamber of our own. It's little like this, right? But a lot of those greenies, they have masses and masses of Joe blogs following them, you know, and it does not take long to persuade Joe blogs that riding horses is evil and abuse and all the rest of it. And that is what is at risk. And that's what people don't realize, is that the people who speak to the masses and are educating the masses who aren't equestrians, it's a much, much bigger audience than we have access to. And that's how these people end up swaying legislation and pushing things across the line. And that's what we're up against. You know, it only takes, you know, I can list them off now. The Hagstrand scandal, Mark Todd's whipping a horse with a stick on cross country, you know, that went viral. You know, there's been so many videos come out. We had a lady here who was caught, somebody got her on her smartphone kicking her horse at an event, you know, taken to court. It's just, this stuff can't fly. If there was a video put together of all of the abusive stuff that's happened in the last 2 years, it would be so easy to sway Joe blogs that all horse riders are like this. And so we're in a period of time where people are starting to question things, and they're starting to go, well, you know, should we really be doing that? And is there another way to do things? And now with the internet, and so many people are offering courses, if you want to try something different with your horse, there will be a course out there, or there's a book to read. You know, I've got a huge library. You know, obviously my interest is in French classical, and the way that I came to that was through modern dressage. So, you know, I've had trainers tell me to crank my horse's head in, and my stallion, it almost broke him. I gave up on riding him twice because I blamed him and said, you know, hey, you know, he's got a dropped hip, he's got these other things going on, too many problems, the horse is just rubbish, right? Wipe your hands of it, move along. And then I sort of started going, I reckon, you know, I'd listened to a few things, and I'd heard a few ideas about classical dressage and going down the French classical route. And I tried it with my horse. I thought, oh, well, I'll give it a go again, because I'd heard of these, you know, amazing transformations that could happen. And literally pretty much all it took was like a slightly different way of thinking about the headset. The pole needs to be the highest point, and that the, you know, the plane of the face needs to be in front of the vertical, and that you don't have to pull the horse in at the same time of driving the hind legs under. Like, that's retarded. If you think of how a horse actually functions, you know, they're not some kind of like bindle where you pull the head in and the hind just magically goes like this. It's the opposite. If the pole comes up, the hind can close under. You know, it's just, when you actually stop and think about the physical structure of the horse, you know, we sit at a massive advantage. You know, this huge heavy leveraged head on the end of a neck, and you sit at the bottom of that with a pair of reins that you can just pull in. You know, it's too easy, it's too cheap, and that is what a lot of trainers are just peddling, is that cheap riding. Pull the head in, you know, and the damage that you do to a horse's body by not only fixing the rein and holding the horse in one posture for an extended period of time. You know, if we force people into these positions, they would realize how compensation works, and they'd realize how damaging it is to muscles. You know, and recently there was a case with a dog that had its mouth strapped shut with tape, and the guy got taken to court, and, you know, he got a massive fine and banned from owning dogs for a long time, if not lifetime. I can't quite recall now, but I remember it being a big case that came out. And yet we're doing the same thing to horses. Just crank its mouth shut. Like, you don't like your horse's busy mouth, you know, crank it shut.
It makes complete sense. Come, guys, please. But this is one of the areas where there's such a huge discrepancy between what I say and what I do.
Yeah.
Right? So Elsa says, I changed to French riding and then long distance after a crank him in lesson. Years later, I also found the French classical system, and yet that is older than all the modern craziness. You know, I really do believe the statement of dressage is for the horse, not the horse for dressage. And when we can use movement to heal the body, yes, because I've seen it as well. Do it exactly the same thing. You know, I did the straightness training thing. I have a severely neurological horse who's off his rocker. He's so crazy. I thought I would never ride this horse in my whole life. And the transformation I saw in him in a year of doing straightness training was ridiculous. You know, all from the ground, all in hand, because I'm not super comfortable riding him and I don't have great riding skills, but I could have taken it further into riding. It just blew my mind. And it's very real. It's very doable. It's very achievable, but it requires a whole new skill set. And most riders are not willing to invest in that whole new skill set. The time, the physical time, and then finding the information, sure, but the actual time it takes to develop a new skill set and a new perspective, I find they're not willing. They don't want to go there.
It's a massive investment in time. What I did was I invested in books and a Pivo.
And
I honestly reckon that if you just use the horse as your teacher and your guide, and you've got enough like theoretical knowledge in your mind, and then you watch back what's happening on Pivo, you know, your rides afterwards, you can make so much progress because it's just you and the horse having this conversation and working through stuff. And look, that's stuff that you can't get in a lesson. You know, like I used to really struggle. I'd say to my clients, like, "There, did you feel that?" And they were like, "No, I didn't feel anything." And yet I can see that the horse has just had a moment of like, and they're not feeling it. And I can't just say, "There it was, did you feel it?" Because it doesn't work like that. You have to be able to have feel for the horse, you know, through the seat, through the hands. It's insane, you know.
Which I think is where, you know, getting onto the ground is so valuable, because the moment you're on the ground, you can see it, right?
Yes, you
so
can.
I am exactly that rider who can't feel the change, because I don't have that feel developed. It's something you have to develop and practice, right? That's fine. But if I get on the ground, I can see my horse. And when I video it and I watch it back, I can see 20 times more. It's ridiculous. It's so valuable. So I agree with you. We have to have that feedback loop of what we feel. Someone pointing it out to us is also really good, and then watching it back so that we can see it. So we have that. That's really good. I think that is a very good place for us to start wrapping up, because we're sitting at almost an hour and it's the middle of the night for you. You're a night owl. Thank you.
I won't go to bed for another 3 hours anyway. It's fine.
Oh my goodness. So I really want to invite our audience, guys, if you want to have more of these conversations about welfare, social license, and our role in this whole thing, let me know, because I think that I want to take that on this year. I generally shy away from the truly difficult conversations where there is no right answer, because I can see there is no right answer. You know, just saying that this is wrong and we can't do that, that's great, I agree, but what is the alternative? And how do we make that a reality? How do we implement it? How do we bring it into the industry? In essence, the FEI's rules are correct. They're asking for the correct things, but implementing them, there's a discrepancy. So what do we do? How do we fill that gap, right? Those are the questions. So if you want to have more of that, let me know and we will do that, and we'll bring that to you guys this year. I think it's a good focus. Elsa, thank you so much. So interesting and a vital topic. Ethics, ethics, ethics. Not developed without discussion. Thanks again so much. Thanks, Elsa. I agree. And our role in that, because I feel like for us as professionals, we can either mentally and emotionally break ourselves by trying to bring change, or walk away from the clients that are doing the things that are, you know, not in alignment with our viewpoint, and then feel guilty and frustrated and broken because we're not helping those horses who need us most.
I think there was a really good point made earlier too about the girl who said that she had the 5-year-old, and people were like, why aren't you doing, you know, XYZ? So what we can first do is we can flip social pressure, right? From that discussion of like, why aren't you doing enough with your 5-year-old, to like, oh, it's so great that you're not pushing your 5-year-old. If we can just change that public perception within our own equestrian community, I really feel like we'll be on the right track. You know, we've got to swap around that social pressure that's happening at the moment, because I hear that from so many people. You know, people have given me grief about not being on my 5-6-year-old and getting going already. If we can just through education start to flip that conversation, I think that'll be a great start.
I agree. I agree. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Rebecca. I really appreciate
Welcome.
it. Hopefully we can have more conversations this year. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I hope more people. I hope more people have honest, real conversations about how we're forward.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.